I had grease on my hands, sweat trickling down my back, and a stubborn alternator that refused to budge. That van had carried me and my kids through 4 states, 3 jobs, and 2 evictions. I wasn't about to let it die in the middle of a grocery store parking lot. My name's Nia Jordan. I don't wear my history on my sleeve, not anymore. People see a woman in worn jeans fixing her own vehicle, and they make assumptions. I'm used to the sideways glances, the passive stares that linger too long. But that day was different. I had the hood propped up, arms buried inside the engine bay, when I heard it, the steady cadence of boots on asphalt. Military boots. Sharp. Disciplined. Getting closer. I wiped the sweat from my brow, turned my head, and saw him. A 4-star general. In uniform. Alone. Approaching with purpose. My first instinct was to move aside, maybe he thought I was blocking something or needed help. But before I could say anything, he stopped just feet from me, his eyes locked onto my forearm. I didn't realize the sleeve of my shirt had rolled up so far. The tattoo. He had seen it. And then, to my shock, he saluted. Right there in the middle of that parking lot. A rigid, respectful salute, like I'd just walked off a battlefield. I blinked. Sir. He dropped his hand slowly. His voice, deep and steady, carried weight. Ma'am, is that what I think it is? I glanced down. The ink was faded but unmistakable, a minimalist black emblem, etched under my skin for nearly 2 decades. I nodded slowly. Yes, sir. It is. He took a breath, studying my face. Then he said something that caught me completely off guard. Do you mind if I shake your hand? I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to shake his hand, but because I wasn't sure what was happening. People didn't usually look at me like this. With reverence. With recognition. But he wasn't backing down. So I wiped the grit off my palm and extended it. His handshake was firm, like a soldier's. Like one who'd never left the code behind. I don't mean to pry, he said gently, but you earned that ink, didn't you? I nodded once, quietly. Operation Resolute Star. 2006, Echo Company. His jaw clenched. I thought so. I haven't seen that mark in years. Most hadn't. The emblem was unofficial, known only to a small circle of operatives. Black Ops medical support. We weren't frontline, but we went wherever the fallout hit hardest. Mass casualty zones, extraction sites, places so hot command wouldn't even admit we were there. And Echo Company? We didn't talk about Echo. Ever. I lost someone in that op, the general continued. Captain Marcus Traylor. He was one of mine. I swallowed hard. He bled out in my hands. We couldn't move fast enough. His expression shifted, not angry, not accusatory. Just, solemn. I figured as much, he said. You stayed behind when the convoy pulled out, didn't you? I nodded again. 12 hours. I hid the wounded in an irrigation trench. He looked off for a moment. They said those survivors made it out because of a ghost. Now I know the ghost had a name. There was a long silence. Then he spoke again, this time lower. People probably don't know who you are anymore. But I do. I shrugged. Wasn't about being known. The general's eyes locked on mine. It should have been. Behind us, a couple in khakis slowed their cart, staring. Not at the van. At me. At him. At the unexpected image, a decorated general, saluting a grease-covered woman beside a busted-down van. He noticed too. But instead of leaving, he raised his voice. You saved American lives. You gave everything. That kind of service never gets old, and it sure as hell never gets forgotten. And just like that, he turned and walked away. But not before others started to notice. I stood there frozen, my hands still warm from the handshake, the van completely forgotten. The general's footsteps faded into the hum of a busy parking lot, but the echo of his salute lingered like a weight on my chest, a good weight. The kind that reminds you you're still seen. A young guy in a polo shirt, maybe mid-20s, approached hesitantly. "Excuse me, ma'am, were you in the service?" I gave a small nod. "Medical Corps." His eyes widened. "My dad was a Navy corpsman. Said the medics were the real heroes." I just smiled. I'd heard that line before. Never meant much coming from strangers. But now, with that general's words still in the air, it hit different. A woman with a toddler on her hip stopped next. Then a store manager. A clerk taking his break. One by one, people paused, curious. Respectful. Like they were piecing together something they'd never been taught to look for, a story in oil-stained hands and quiet dignity. No medals. No uniform. Just a faded tattoo on a tired arm. The manager offered me water. Someone brought over a portable jumper, thinking I might need help. I told them I was fine, the van just needed a new belt, but they stayed anyway. Not out of pity. Out of something else. Recognition. Then I heard a voice behind me. "You should come inside." I turned. It was a middle-aged woman in civilian clothes, with a military ID clipped to her belt. "I'm with Fort Belton," she said gently. "We saw what just happened. He's already called it in." "Called what in?" She looked me square in the eye. "Your file's being reopened." I frowned. "Why?" "I didn't ask for anything." She nodded slowly. "You didn't." "But he did." And when a 4-star general says someone's service went unacknowledged, the system listens. I stared at her, unsure whether to feel proud or uneasy. "I don't need a ceremony," I muttered. She smiled. "Good. Because that's not what this is." "What is it then?" She leaned in, her voice just above a whisper. "It's correction." Correction. The word sat with me as I watched her walk back toward a black SUV with tinted windows and federal plates. I'd spent years trying to forget that chapter of my life, not because I was ashamed of it, but because no one ever asked. No one cared to know what we did, what we sacrificed, or what we lived with afterward. And now, out of nowhere, the system that had erased us was suddenly dusting off old files like we'd just been misplaced paperwork. I packed up my tools slowly, still unsure what to feel. The van was fixed now, belt tightened, engine humming softly. But something else had shifted, and it wasn't mechanical. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated, then picked up. "Ms. Jordan," a calm voice said. "This is Command Officer Breckenridge with military records and review. We've been instructed to expedite a re-evaluation of your service file. General Kessler submitted a personal citation." I blinked. He remembered my name. The voice was quiet for a second. "He remembered your actions. And he attached testimony from others. Seems you made quite an impression back then." I sat in the van, staring through the windshield. Cars came and went. No one else saluted. But I didn't need them to. The voice continued. "Are you able to come in for a formal review?" "When?" "Tomorrow morning. 0800, if possible, wear your patch, the tattoo qualifies." I almost laughed. "That's not regulation. General overrode that. Said the ink's more honest than any uniform." I didn't know what to say. For a moment, I just listened to the line, the faint background noise of typing and distant radio chatter. Then I gave the only answer I had, "I'll be there." Before he hung up, the officer added one last thing. "Oh, and Ms. Jordan?" "Yeah. Welcome back." The next morning came quicker than I expected. I barely slept. I spent most of the night pacing my small apartment, pulling out an old duffel from the closet, the one I hadn't opened in years. Inside was my field patch, a laminated copy of my discharge papers, and a folded letter I never mailed. It was addressed to Marcus Traylor's family. I left it there. At 6:30 a.m., I threw on a clean work shirt and rolled the sleeve up just enough for the tattoo to show. I didn't own a suit. Didn't need one. Fort Belton's main building stood like a block of polished stone, cold, proud, silent. A gate officer met me at the perimeter. He didn't ask for my ID. Just looked at the forearm, then waved me through. By the time I stepped into the review chamber, 3 men in uniform were already seated. The fourth chair, his chair, was empty. Until it wasn't. General Kessler entered the room like a man on a mission. He didn't waste time with introductions. Just stood behind his seat, looked at me, and said clearly, "This is long overdue." The officer to his right, younger, maybe 40s, cleared his throat and began to read from a folder. It detailed my actions during Operation Resolute Star. Casualty numbers. Triage under fire. Improvised evacuation techniques. My refusal to board the last chopper out. Then came the kicker. For distinguished acts of valor beyond the scope of assigned duty, we hereby recommend Ms. Nia Jordan for the Medal of Service and Special Recognition under the United Forces Resolution 41B. I felt like the air had been punched out of me. I wasn't used to being spoken about in the third person like that, like a hero. "Ms. Jordan," the general said, finally taking his seat. "You don't have to say anything today. But you deserve to hear this directly, your service mattered. Even if the world forgot, the people you saved never did." I didn't cry. Not then. Not yet. I just nodded. And for the first time in nearly 20 years, I believed it might be okay to stop hiding. The ceremony was scheduled for the following week. Private, at my request, no cameras, no press. Just the few who knew what really happened out there. They held it in the Fort Belton Honor Hall, a quiet, echoing chamber where sunlight poured through high windows onto stone walls etched with names. Some of those names I knew. Some still haunted my dreams. When I walked in, I didn't recognize half the faces. Officers, medics, old squad leads, most grayer, slower, but all standing at attention when I entered. At the front stood General Kessler, and beside him, my son, Malik. I hadn't told him everything. He'd always just known his mom as someone who worked hard, fixed vans, and kept food on the table. He had no idea what I carried, or what that tattoo really meant. But that morning, he stood tall in a pressed shirt, eyes wide as he finally saw me through a different lens. Kessler stepped forward with a box in his hand. "Ms. Jordan," he began, "on behalf of the United Forces and in recognition of your unyielding courage during Operation Resolute Star, we present you with the Medal of Service and Special Recognition. You didn't ask for this. But history needs it." He opened the box slowly. The medal was simple, silver, understated, a symbol, not a prize. As he pinned it near my collar, a hush fell over the room. Then, in a moment I'll never forget, Kessler did it again, he saluted me. And this time, the entire room followed. A wave of uniforms and veterans, hands raised in silent respect. I met their eyes one by one, and for the first time in my life, I felt seen not just for what I'd done, but for who I'd quietly been all along. And then, from the back of the room, Malik's voice broke through. "That's my mom." And just like that, I finally let myself cry. After the ceremony, no one rushed out. People lingered, some to shake my hand, others just to stand nearby, unsure of what to say. I got a lot of quiet nods, and a few "thank you's" from soldiers who hadn't even been born when we ran that op. But the one that hit me hardest came from a woman in a plain black blazer, no rank, no badge. "You don't know me, she said softly. But my brother, he made it out because of you. He told me the only reason he saw daylight again was because some medic dragged him through a minefield. I looked at her closely. Private H. Wilkes. Her eyes filled. You remember him? I remember all of them. She hugged me without asking, and I didn't stop her. Later that evening, back at home, the house felt quieter than usual, but not empty. There was something different in the air. Malik sat across from me at the kitchen table, his eyes still wide, processing everything. You were really in all that? He asked. Like, for real? Yeah, I said, setting the metal box gently on the table. It wasn't glamorous. But it was real. He studied the tattoo again, like he was seeing it with new eyes. Why didn't you ever tell me? I thought about that for a second. Because I didn't want you growing up thinking you had to prove something to matter. I wanted you to just live. He nodded slowly, absorbing it. Then, with the kind of innocence only a teenager could have, he said, well, you kinda proved everything anyway. I chuckled. Guess I did. He leaned back. So what happens now? I looked at the metal, then at him. Now. I said. Now I go back to fixing vans. But this time. I let people see me. And for the first time in decades, I was proud of what they'd see. A week later, I was back under the hood of someone else's van, same parking lot, same busted wrench, same worn-out gloves. But everything had changed. People recognized me now. Not everyone, just enough. A man in a delivery truck honked and gave me a thumbs up. A woman offered coffee for the hero. Someone even left a handwritten note on my windshield that read, "Thank you for your service, we see you now." It wasn't about the medal. Or the ceremony. It was the shift. The silent correction of years spent invisible. Malik had started telling his friends. He even wrote a paper about me for his civics class, called The Soldier Who Came Home Quietly. I couldn't read it without tearing up. And the tattoo? I stopped covering it. Funny how something that once felt like a secret now felt like a banner, not of pain, but of purpose. One afternoon, a teenage girl came up to me as I was packing up my toolbox. She looked nervous, clutching a notebook. "Hi," she said. "Are you Ms. Jordan?" I nodded. "I saw your ceremony on a live stream. My older brother just enlisted, and he's nervous. He doesn't think he's brave enough. I was wondering if I could ask you what being brave means." I smiled, crouched to meet her eyes, and said, "Brave doesn't mean loud. Or fearless. It just means you move forward, even when you're scared. It means you show up when no one's watching, and sometimes, when they finally do, you keep showing up anyway." She wrote that down. And for the rest of the day, I kept working. Same oil. Same van. Same Nia Jordan. Only this time, the world saluted. A month later, I received a letter in the mail. Official envelope. Military seal. Inside was a single page, handwritten. Not typed. It read, "Ms. Jordan, I've served 37 years in uniform. I've led battalions, counseled presidents, and walked the halls of power. But saluting you in that parking lot remains the most honorable act I've ever performed. When we first crossed paths, I saw someone bent over an engine. But when I saw that tattoo, I remembered the ghost stories. The field medics who stayed behind. The ones who never asked for recognition, and who rarely got it. Well, not anymore. Your file is no longer classified. Your record is no longer buried. Your name has been added to the Hall of Unseen Valor at Fort Belton, permanent, engraved, and publicly acknowledged. Some heroes are written into history. Others become history, the kind that wakes up a sleeping country and reminds it what honor really looks like. Thank you for reminding me. With unwavering respect, General Alan Kessler. I read it twice, then placed it in the same drawer as my discharge papers and the old letter to Captain Traylor's family. Only this time, I added something new. A photo. Taken by a passerby. It showed me standing beside my van, grease on my hands, sun in my eyes, and a general mid-salute. No spotlight. No flag. Just two people in a moment of truth. And now, I keep it by my bed, not for pride, not for memory. But as a reminder, even when the world forgets, integrity remembers. 6 months passed. Life didn't turn glamorous, and I didn't want it to. I still fixed vans, still lived modestly, still brewed coffee strong enough to jolt the dead. But something had shifted beyond my garage or Fort Belton. One day, I got a call from a local high school. "We're hosting Veterans Day this year," the principal said. "We were wondering, would you speak?" I almost said no. Public speaking wasn't my thing. I was more comfortable with socket wrenches than microphones. But then I thought of all the years I stayed quiet. Of Malik watching. Of that girl with the notebook. So I said yes. When I walked into the school auditorium, I didn't wear the medal. I wore the same boots I wore in '06. Same sleeve rolled up. Same tattoo visible. The room fell quiet. I walked to the podium and looked out at rows of students, teachers, veterans, people of all backgrounds. "My name is Nia Jordan," I began. "I'm not a war hero. I didn't take a hill or lead a charge. I patched wounds in the dark. I stayed behind when I could have left. I didn't do it for a medal. I did it because someone had to." I told them about duty. About sacrifice. About the years no one asked. About what it meant to carry on without applause. Then I looked at the students and said, "You don't need a uniform to serve. Sometimes, service is staying calm when others panic. Sometimes, it's telling the truth when it's easier to lie. Sometimes, it's just not giving up, even when no one sees you." There was silence. Then a standing ovation. Later, a senior came up to me. He had tears in his eyes. "I was going to drop out this year," he said. "Didn't think I mattered. But hearing you, made me think maybe I do." I didn't need a salute for that moment. I just smiled and said, "You do, son. You really do." And as I walked out into the daylight, past the flagpole, the breeze caught my sleeve. That old tattoo, weathered, cracked, and still proud, was shining in the sun. Because legacy isn't about medals. It's about who finds strength in your story. 2 weeks after the school speech, I got another call, this one from Washington. A woman introduced herself as Commander Elise Navarro, liaison for the Congressional Committee on Military Oversight. Her voice was steady but urgent. "Ms. Jordan, I've read your file. The updated one." I didn't say anything. I'd learned that silence often did more than words. "We'd like you to testify." My eyebrows raised. "Testify?" "Yes," she said. "There's a closed-door session reviewing the treatment of classified personnel who were never formally acknowledged after operations like Resolute Star. We need someone who lived it, someone who didn't just survive, but stayed silent when it cost them everything." I shook my head instinctively. "I'm not political. I don't do DC." "You don't have to," she replied. "Just do what you've always done, tell the truth. That's all anyone's asking." I asked for 24 hours to think about it. That night, I sat on the floor of my living room, the letter from General Kessler in one hand, and Malik Civic's essay in the other. One was formal. One was raw. Both said the same thing, you were there. You mattered. Now it's time others knew. The next morning, I called her back. "I'll do it," I said. "But not in a suit. I'm coming in the same work boots I've worn since 2006. She paused, then chuckled softly. "Honestly, ma'am, I wouldn't want it any other way. A month later, I stood in a room filled with suits and stars, cameras off, recorders rolling. They introduced me formally, Ms. Nia Jordan, independent mechanic and former Echo Company combat medic. But I opened differently. My name is Nia Jordan. I was just fixing my van when a general saw my tattoo and remembered what America forgot. And for the next hour, I didn't hold back. Not out of anger. Out of duty. Because sometimes, the mission doesn't end on the battlefield, it starts when the silence does. The room was quiet when I finished speaking. No clapping. No chatter. Just a weight in the air, the kind that only settles when truth has been spoken and there's no going back. A senator leaned forward. Ms. Jordan, on behalf of this committee, I want to personally thank you for your service and your silence. I looked him in the eye. I didn't stay silent because I was told to. I stayed silent because I thought no one cared. He swallowed hard. They do now. Afterward, I was escorted out a side entrance to avoid media. Commander Navarro walked beside me, hands clasped behind her back. Your testimony's already in the record, she said. But I think its impact is just beginning. What happens now? We draft policy, she replied. Make sure people like you aren't buried in redacted files ever again. Recognition. Mental health access. Retroactive honors. Your name's going to lead a lot more than a paragraph in a folder. That was fine with me. I didn't need fame. I needed the next Nia Jordan, the one out there right now, patching wounds in silence, to know she mattered before the cameras showed up. 6 months later, I was back at Fort Belton. But this time, not for me. They invited me to unveil the new section of the Honor Hall, one dedicated to unseen valor. A full wall lined with the names of classified medics, support staff, and operatives who'd never received medals, only scars. And at the center of it all, a bronze relief of the tattoo. No words. Just the symbol. Next to it, etched in steel, she stayed behind so others could move forward. In honor of Nia Jordan, Echo Company Malik stood beside me, tall now. Confident. He placed his hand over mine. You ready? He asked. I nodded. And together, we pulled the cloth away. A wave of silence. Then applause. Real, slow building, earned. That day, the world didn't just salute me, it saluted everyone like me. And as I looked around at veterans, civilians, and wide-eyed kids staring at that wall, I realized something: history doesn't forget heroes. Sometimes, it just takes a little longer to remember them.